Hey guys, about a decade ago, Chris and Dwayne Johnson conducted a computer analysis comparing the 1830 Book of Mormon to over 100,000 other contemporary books. They found that the Book of Mormon and the First Book of Napoleon share similar language and phraseology. They concluded that this book must have served as inspiration for Joseph as he fraudulently wrote the Book of Mormon. So, let's talk about it. Alright, so the First Book of Napoleon was published in 1809. You can read it for free on archive.org. It's 146 pages or 22,500 words long, which is about 12 times shorter than the Book of Mormon's word count. It's about the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars.
The short dead dude from our history review.
The book was written under the biblical pen name Eliakim the Scribe. I don't know how you pronounce it. Now, in the 1850s and 60s, there was a guy named Modeste Grau, I don't know how you pronounce that one either, who wrote under the pen name Eliakim. Thus, some people believe Grau is the true author of the First Book of Napoleon. When Chris Johnson presented on this topic at a 2013 conference for former members of the church, he pointed out, to the audience's delight,
as far as we can tell, this is really crazy, he was 14.
This is, of course, a jab at Latter-day Saints who find it improbable that Joseph Smith could have written the Book of Mormon at 24 years old. Interestingly, in a comment section only 10 days after the presentation, Johnson seems to agree with the idea that Grau probably wasn't the author after all. And as it turns out, a pre-publication manuscript of the First Book of Napoleon exists, which indicates that the true author is actually a guy named Michael Linning. Quick thank you to the lovely folks over at the State Library of New South Wales for sending me images of that manuscript. Michael Linning would have been 35 years old when the book was published. He was a graduate of Glasgow College and a member of the Society of Writers to His Majesty's Signet. But how similar is the wording between the two books? One antagonistic document called the CES Letter compares these two sets of phrases from, quote, the beginning portion of the Book of Mormon with the same order in the beginning portion of the First Book of Napoleon. At first glance, these parallels might give you the impression that Joseph just copied straight from the First Book of Napoleon. But when you do your homework, you'll notice a few things. First, to say these phrases all appear in the same order is misleading. Some of these phrases appear multiple times in their respective books, which gives you leeway to artificially order some elements the way you want by picking and choosing which instances of each phrase you want to include on the list. But even if we are selective about which instances of each phrase we use, the ordering still isn't perfect. And if you look at the actual first instance of each of these phrases in each book, then the ordering is quite different. It may or may not be a coincidence, but interestingly, the Spanish translation of this same antagonistic document leaves out the detail about the ordering of these phrases. The next detail we need to look at are the ellipses between phrases. In the 1830 Book of Mormon, these phrases are scattered across the first 10 pages of the text. In the First Book of Napoleon, they're scattered throughout the first 21 pages. Personally, I have a really hard time getting on board with the idea that Joseph was just reading this book and taking mental notes of seemingly random phrases like condemn not or the land, or Jerusalem. It feels like a massive, unnecessary stretch. There are some longer phrases that match even beyond the phrases we've looked at, but I don't find them particularly impressive either. By way of comparison, Latter-day Saint researcher Jeff Lindsay found that the Book of Mormon uses a ton of the same phrases we find in Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The only problem is that Leaves of Grass was published 25 years after the Book of Mormon. There's no connection between the two. Just because two books share some phraseology does not mean one inspired the other. Some critics make the argument that if you just read the First Book of Napoleon, you'll find that it just has the same scriptural feel as the Book of Mormon. Well, yeah, because both books clearly use biblical style language. If you read the Bible, you'll find that it also has a similar scriptural feel. At the end of the day, there's no evidence that Joseph Smith ever owned, accessed, or had even heard about the First Book of Napoleon. Now, I do recognize that critics are not claiming that the First Book of Napoleon was the only source of inspiration. Many critics, if not most, believe Joseph used a variety of books as inspiration. I actually keep an informal running list of the various sources that different critics have claimed Joseph gleaned information from. And at least in my mind, the longer and more complicated you have to make your list to explain away the Book of Mormon without good evidence, the more contrived and unlikely the authorship theory actually becomes. As always, you're certainly free to disagree and come to your own conclusions. If you want to learn more about some of the other authorship theories floating around, this episode might be a fun one for you. Have a great day.